Hello and welcome back. Today I have a video for you and I'm going to talk about the bumps and knobs on megalithic and polygonal stones and give you my idea what I think they are, because there seems to be quite a lot of confusion and nobody seems to know what they are or what they do, if they do anything. And then in the second half, I'm going to give you my idea on how this style of stones was made and how they made these walls. And that'll take a little while to explain, but right now I just want to concentrate on these little bumps and protrusions all over. So besides them being all over the whole world, they only seem to appear on things that are at least 12,000 years old. So if they're on things that are 12,000 years old, then that means they were there for a long time before they were 12,000 years old. Because things don't just pop up. I mean, they could have been there for a long time. Here's the pyramid. You can see we have different styles of the bumpy look. Technically, those are knobs. In fact, if I can zoom in on that a little bit here, I would like to also point out that we have the smooth, flat stones over here, which is what I thought the pyramids were totally made out of. And then I was surprised to see this. So they have different styles, but this is, to me, this is just an earthy look. And basically, those are knobs. There's a knob right there. And you can see they're knobs all over the place here. Now, I don't think that these stones were made the same way that I think the tight-fitting polygonal walls were made, because obviously you can see there's some pretty big spaces here. More knobs, although they are small. So I've seen a ton of videos on what these knobs are all about. Used for lifting and locking the stones together, which doesn't make any sense because they're sticking. There's no stone there for them to lock into. Seems to be randomly patterned too. Sometimes you'll find them in groups. I don't know if maybe they do change the resonance of the stone somehow. If you hit them with a piece of wood, what happens? There's a broken one. In fact, I thought maybe they were sticking out because there was some kind of a super hard concretion or something in the stone which they had to avoid. So they just, carved around it or whatever. But I don't think that's the case. So it's pretty obvious to me that these knobs and bumps and protrusions of all different shapes and sizes don't do anything at all. That is totally aesthetic. Furthermore, I think it's probably a signature of the builder. This is the builder's style. You could always tell one of their buildings, or that it was them, because of these bumps. So they must have been pretty popular 20, 30, 40,000 years ago as builders, for all we know. And another thing that I would also like to point out is that they are, not only are they all over the world, but how is it that all over the world at once everybody decided to start putting bumps on their stones? That doesn't make any sense. These were builders that went all over the world and they built this stuff. Obviously, if your civilization it can't do this, and there is somebody that can do it for you, you would call them. So here's what we were told was a quarry, but it's got the knobs on it. Why would someone leave? That's just a signature as far as I'm concerned. They don't do anything. They're not handles. You can't move it with. They don't lock anything. They don't really change the resonance of the stone at all. You know, the vibration and all that. Because you can sit there and beat on those with a stick all day. You might get different tones. But that would be the only possible use that I could think for putting those there as far as a use goes. But I think they're just there for looks. That's it. Well, no one can prove it otherwise. There's one in a quarry for some reason. So that's all I'm going to say about those bumps. They're nothing. They're just looks. It's the signature of the builder, period. And just people trying to figure out what they're for just kills me. They're not for anything. They're just there for looks. But what I really want to concentrate on now is how these blocks were put in here so tightly and so perfectly that I think I've got it figured out. Now, the builders were not small people. I think they were big people. Very big people. They're not here anymore, but we've seen the bones of the giants. They're all over the planet. Not just here. They pop up in North America, all over the place. So there were giants. They had to have been the builders. Secondly, I think that the only way that you can get this to work is if you rough cut the stone, heated it up to the point where it's pliable, and you set the stone in. Like, let's say right here in the middle, this middle stone. And they're on the second row. So they already laid this one, let's say. Boom, right on top of this. Now this surface here is already going to be flat. Or it can be flattened out. Then when you put this red hot stone that is just hot enough that it's pliable, but not hot enough that it changes the mineralogy so that it's not, say, whatever you want it to be. For instance, if it were andesite or basalt or granite, you could heat this rock up red hot to where it's just pliable enough that you could press it down. So, if you're using a big square, whatever kind of a metal press on the top of this hot rock, you set it into place. Well, when you squeeze the rock down, it's going to tend to want to bulge out a little bit because you're putting pressure on it. So now the rock wants to bulge out somewhat. That pushes the edges tight together here with the other stones. The top is already flattened because you've been pressing this thing down with some kind of a bar. You set your next hot stone in there. Or maybe you might just set a few of them in all at once and then press them down hard. That would make this surface up here where they come together so perfectly. Look how level that is going across. You would be able to carve. Look how long it would take you just to carve and carve and carve and carve, just to get these rounded edges here and have everything fit just so perfectly straight. The beauty of heating the stone so that it's just barely pliable, and it only works if you can, manipulate. You have to be able to press the stone down, and it fits together with the other stone absolutely perfectly. It's going to press fit, it's going to conform to fit. And if you lay these in here, these are rough cut stones, you lay them in, maybe they're all red hot, maybe one whole row at a time, and then as you put them in there, you flatten them down on the top, you press them in there. So the squares are easy. But when you get into shapes like this, right here, how would you ever carve this and make this stone fit perfectly in there, all the way across? And you're not just on there, you have all these different weird angles here. Look at this, it's just barely set down in there. But this is all done on purpose because this is how this all locks together. This is what makes it earthquake proof, or at least resistant. Totally, without any mortar whatsoever. Why would they need mortar? Because really, when they put these rough cut stones in here, they're not, like I said, they're rough cut. So when you press them together, there's little inconformities on each stone. So they're going to be irregular surfaces, but it doesn't matter. They're red hot, it gets pressed together. I bet if you were to take these stones apart, you would see that, if you examine and you knew what to look for. I mean, you have to, in order to figure some of these things out, you have to think a little bit out of the box. You have to stand back and go, okay, logically, what can it be? No one can figure it out. Nobody knows, again. So what does it have to be? Sanding these things down and chiseling away. They left the bumps on here when they made the stones. They're just rough cut stones. So that would bring up another question. Well, how did they make these stones red hot? You know how much energy it takes to make a stone red hot? A lot. So maybe there's some hidden technology there. I don't know. I don't know how they got the stones this hot, but it's pretty evident to me that that's the only way you can do this, is to rough cut that stone, rough cut this edge, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect, because when you set this stone in, you're pressing it down into this, corner right here, and it's going to conform to that. As long as you cut the stones fairly straight enough, you'll get a nice edge out here. So for instance, on this wall, I'm not sure what kind of stone that is. It doesn't look like andesite or basalt. I think this is Nimrod's wall. It might be limestone, or I guess it kind of looks like limestone. So I'm not sure if you could heat the limestone up hot enough to do what I was talking about, building them, so tightly together and pressing them. But if it was red hot and somewhat malleable, you could make these lines on the front that are between these seams, those flat areas. You could just press an iron on that and just push it hard and make this all flat. And if you're a giant and you're 20 feet tall or something, it'll probably be no problem. Those hot blocks keep piling in there, and you shape them in there with your iron as they go. Now over here we have this block here, which is kind of interesting. Here, let me zoom that in a little. The way it comes down, over, and then they have a little vent built in here. This was just rough cut, probably red hot, just pressed it right in there. Look how straight that is up there. And this was probably like a small, square, long piece of iron or whatever they used. Maybe just press it in there. So the key to this whole operation is moving these stones around and moving red hot stones around too. So obviously maybe they had some kind of pinchers or something. They just grabbed them and threw them on. Who knows? Maybe they had some kind of levitation technology using sound and vibration. Here's another style. That's rough. Those are knobs. Every stone has one though. So it's like a style. I mean, every one of those has a knob on it. Look at some of those knobs are really like the little knobs you saw on the other stones. Does that mean that those stones are, those knobs are there? Look how small they are. Those probably can just be picked up and thrown on there. I mean, yeah, they're big, but still, if you're a giant, that's not a problem at all. So this is sandstone at Osiris. I believe it's sandstone. I don't think it's granite. But it doesn't matter really what it is, I suppose. The reason that I'm kind of leaning towards the andesite and granite and basalt being heated and then formed into place is because those are igneous rocks, and I think you could go ahead and heat those up without changing them too much. I'm not sure what would happen to sandstone if you heated it red hot and then shaped it, like this into place, pressed it in. But look at how big the press would have to be for these blocks. They're huge. So that's questionable. Looks like they just cut them and then stuck them on there. But they kept, or sort of maintained, the rounded edge look to give it the impression that it looked like the other stones where they were, squished into place. These fit extremely tightly, but they do have that same knobby signature that has no use except for looks and maybe some kind of identification. So here again we have this same unique style here, which is only found on older buildings and structures. We have the knobs. Now these also have, they're squares, but really they're sort of polygonal because of the angles here. You've got angles, same thing. This is rounded. It doesn't matter if you cut the stone, and this was, they set them in there. I mean, they're experts at doing this, so they know what happens when you get such a gap here, what to do with the stone, how far to stick it out. So some of these had to be stuck out a little bit more in order for when they were pressed down for them to be flat, on the front fairly, because these bumps stick out. Look how far they stick out, pretty far, up here at the top. So it would look kind of rough when you were done. But if you were to be able to press these parts in, I don't think those were just sanded or ground off. Of course, if they were heated hot and pressed in, then you're pressing the front end too while it's still hot. And these all kind of look at the square edges around every single one of these. So they had some kind of a tool that they just pressed it. Now, okay, maybe they ground it off. I don't know for sure if they pressed it or not, and I don't even know for sure if these were heated. I'm just saying, it seems like the logical thing to heat it up red hot, which is no problem if you can heat the rock up red hot and then work with it. I can hardly imagine moving a 100-ton block or 200-ton block. So maybe they heated them up in place. Maybe they had some kind of weird, laser or something. They just hit that rock with a laser, just like on Star Trek, heat that thing up. I mean, it's not that far-fetched. Especially since it looks like that's the only logical way they could have done this. Don't forget, humans haven't been around that long. There's been humanoids in this galaxy or universe for billions of years, probably. So, just because something sounds bizarre doesn't mean it is. 100 years ago, things they thought would be bizarre that we take for granted. And look how much time that would save building things. Because look, these guys had to go all over the world. These knobs are all over the world. I mean, who wants to sit there carving away on these blocks unless they had some really good tools that fit in their hand that were probably as big as a car? You know, yeah, something that big, just grind that stone off and boom, 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 That's a possibility. Maybe they didn't heat them red hot, but the red hot method does seem to fit as far as these corners here, because I think even with a sander as big as a car, that still would be pretty hard to get this precise, these little corners. I mean, that's just too much. It comes out, it goes at an angle, and then down again. And then we've got a three-way over here, and fitting so perfectly. I just don't think you can cut the rock like that. And by the way, if it's hot enough and pliable enough, you can hit the front of these things with some kind of, grinder or some kind of other pressing tool just to, flatten it all, kind of make it look even. So back to how to get the rock that hot. Well, we know that fire's not going to make the rock melt, or we don't want the rock to melt, we just want it to get soft. I don't think just fire can do that. So they didn't have a big campfire, and they weren't putting the rocks in there and then bringing them out, So they had to have the technology. And with all the spaceship drawings on rocks and caves and so on, those are documented. They go back 30,000 years. So the only way they could have done this is with technology from another world. But then was it another world? For all we know, there were civilizations here 40 million years ago that thrived, and they lasted for tens of millions of years, and then they vanished. We'll never know. Those structures, those stones, if they even had stones, are ground to powder and turned to metamorphic rock since they've been here. And we would never know, because there is absolutely no way that could prove that either way, by the way. So if someone says that that's true, it doesn't really necessarily mean that it is any more than it isn't. But logically it's possible, since the earth has been livable for at least, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 up to 6, well no, it's up about probably 1 billion years, really. If you just came here from another world and say, hey, look, here's Earth, there's nobody here. So, like I said, you got to be outside the box here. You're never going to get anything figured out. Not when you're being educated to believe that 2 and 2 equals 3. Now, my pressed hot stone theory seems to look pretty good when we come to this stone, because look at how the bottom of it is here. They pressed this bottom one down, or maybe they didn't even press this at all. Just when they put these top stones on, they pushed it down and it conformed. Because look, it comes out, it goes down, straight across, and then angles up again. Who would take their time, waste their time grinding a stone like that? That's just ridiculous. It's just too hard to do. And some of these look like where they have a little flat spot that goes right along the seam. Looks like they used a real tiny little press just to push on it, which would only make the stone tighter and seal better. And if you get a little lip around the edge of that too, it's only going to make that even more you know, airtight and everything. Maybe they had a big mirror set up, or they had a bunch of giant mirrors that would just focus in on the rock and heat it up red hot. But one thing is for sure, you only see them on the older megalithic stones and structures and polygonal stones. Nothing newer that I've seen than 10 or 12,000 years ago, because I think I'm pretty sure that's when the builders got wiped out or they left the planet, because there doesn't seem to be anything built by them after then. So I guess we'll end it on that. For my next video, I'm going to cover the geology of Antarctica starting from about 1 billion years ago, work our way forward, going through all the fauna and disasters and everything else, and track the movement of Antarctica across the globe to its final resting position 40 million years ago. And then I'm going to explain why you will probably never find any kind of ruins or megalithic structures left on Antarctica, if there ever was any. And there probably was, and if they were there, they would have been there 40 million years or later. So, or earlier, I should say. Because, like I said, the planet was habitable at least 650 million years ago. We're talking millions here. We can't even track our own ruins here any further back than 30,000 years. Anyway, I think that's kind of too bad, because everything just dissolves after a while. Anyway, it should be quite a video. It's probably going to be at least an hour long, and I'm still working on it. I've got everything going, I think, on it. So we'll see you then, and have a great day.